If you can introduce yourself.
My name is Mary T. Christian. I was born and reared in Hampton, Virginia, on Lincoln Street. Lincoln Street was a street. At that time, the city was segregated. I didn't know what segregated meant at that time. I thought that's just the way life was. And we had streets and, as you say, business and so forth. I attended Union Elementary School, and that was way back. And when I went to elementary school, we always walked to school. They had schools in the neighborhood, and blacks could not ride buses at that time. But what is so strange about when we look back at segregation, I have seen its evolution and its dissolution through the years. But as a child, we didn't say we were disadvantaged or disenfranchised or anything. We went to school, we went to Sunday school, we went to Hampton University for the plays that take us. So the atmosphere when we went, even though segregated, it was a family atmosphere. We learned well. We learned out of the old books that came from the white school, but we learned. And we were taught not just what's in the books, but we were always taught to have respect for each other. We were always taught to strive harder. Because a black teacher would say, if I had a C, Mary, don't bring me another C. You bring me some A's or B's, me not having no C's. And the kids who were lower, they worked with them. So aspirations were high because our teachers always told us, you can do this. They knew the elements of segregation, but we didn't. So what they did was try to give us the confidence and self-esteem. And that went through our elementary school days. And so I'll tell you, that has nothing, I'll tell you that later. It has nothing to do with desegregation. Okay, so then we had the 7-4 system. So we had seventh grade in the elementary and the other grades at high school. So she told you a little bit about Phoenix High School, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it before its evolution. There were no high schools for blacks in the city of Hampton. Hampton University had established George B. Phoenix as a laboratory school for its teachers, for the student teachers and everything, and it evolved into what it was later, Department of Education. So during the time before integration, Hampton realized that, there was no Hampton University, Hampton Institute at the time. There was no black schools for Hampton. The city just kept them going and would have probably kept it going forever like that. But Hampton decided, look, this is enough. Hampton said, look, we'll be closing our school. We need our building. We need it for our teachers. So then Hampton had to find another venue for high schools, and so they built one. But during the time of desegregation, when it was just happening, and schools across the country were, into it, some closed schools for 5 years, some would let students enter their schools. But during that time, Mr. William M. Cooper, who was a renowned educator, and the school is named after him. He was the first member of the Hampton African American on Hampton School Board. And Mr. Hunter Andrews, Attorney Hunter Andrews, senator, and was one with a lot of power in the House of Delegates, the Senate of Virginia. So whatever the evolution was in terms of the way he directed, and I give he consulted with Mr. Cooper, and not a school was closed, not a headline in terms of any disturbance. It just desegregated, and it never had it. I mean, I think we hold a distinction here in Hampton to never have had any disruption or anything to say integrated. Now, when the 60s came, and that was when I'm working at Hampton then, newly after I had taught at elementary. I taught 6th grade at Aberdeen School when I came out of school, and I stayed there until my mentor, Dr. Mitchell, said, you got to come to Hampton. All of my girls and I'm getting ready to retire, and I need somebody to take my place. And even though it was more money in the school system, I went on to Hampton. So during that time, it was also the times the city, and I can remember Hampton's campus was pretty quiet, and Stokely Carmichael came to speak. And when he opened up, and everybody was in the big auditorium, Ogden Hall, and when first thing he said, when they said, "Okay, Campbell," he stood there for about seconds and just stared, and he did this, and he said, "Hampton, where are your voices?" And that was when the other colleges were marching and so forth and all. And he ended with, "Hampton, still I ask where your voices." Honey, the kids got together. I mean, that was the impetus. That was the inspiration they needed. And that's when they got together, joined students from all over in marching, for justice and whatever else the cause. So being instructor at Hampton, and they marched for the desegregate the lunch counters and all of the other, as you say, the stores that didn't have, blacks could not go in and so forth. So they did the sit-ins. And so some 2 or 3 people had called for me to have an interview, have a conference with me. And when they came in, there were 3 white businessmen. One was from Leggett's, one was from 2 other stores. Not the pharmacy that they were picketing, because you couldn't sit in the pharmacy. Blacks couldn't sit there. So they came and said, "Christian, we don't have a lunch counter. And we just don't think it's fair for the students to be picketing our stores because we don't have a lunch counter. We came here to employ you to ask the president and to stop the students from picketing. We don't think it's fair." And I said, "I know you don't have a lunch counter, but you belong to the Retail Merchants Association, do you not?" "Well, yes, but all of them do." I said, "But you have the power to say, if you don't want to be picketed, then you stop those stores that are being segregated and treated." So, next thing you know, as we say, the green power, the money, and finally the lunch counters were integrated. Now, the schools also, you had this little time when students, black students were there. They were in a minority in the beginning. But it still was not the turbulence that came along with integration in many of the other cities, even like in Richmond and other places in Virginia. But it had its toll. But people then were becoming so much more aware of the segregation. And as she tried to point out, and I don't know, we were just happy little children growing up. And, we know that, whatever I did over there, it didn't matter. As I say, in our community, we had everything we wanted. And on Lincoln Street, we had our teachers living right in our community, pastors, then everybody lived in the black community, lived in the community. Lincoln Street was a beautiful street. People grew their flowers and everything. It was no kind of ghetto at all. It was nothing that we had to raise us from. We went from one thing to the other. And sometimes, as I look back, it was more detrimental. I'm all for integration and desegregation. Never really got integrated, but desegregation. But I think that the African American students got a little lost after desegregation. During that time, as I pointed out, we didn't have the books and we didn't have the resources. We just had teachers with heart and teachers who knew what our potential was and so forth. But during the time then when I was on school board, I replaced Mr. William Cooper. So I was the first African American woman to be on the Hampton School Board. So during that time, just before that time, this is a facet of desegregation. Okay, the schools after they closed Phoenix. But let me say one word about the desegregation. And George B. Phoenix High School was one of the best high schools in the country. So, I mean, and superintendents and all, I was attending a conference out in Nevada. I was on teacher education, and the superintendent of schools here, Mr. Yalton Lindsay, was speaking to this national group, nobody from Hampton. And he said, we are talking about cutting edge education. And he said, I want to tell you about a cutting edge educational high school. And it's located in my hometown in Hampton, Virginia. I just knew he was going to say Hampton High School. And he said, George B. Phoenix High School. Now, the reason it was because, as I say, we had the resources of Hampton University. We had the teachers, part of their staff, part of their teaching load. Like they would teach maybe 6 hours at Hampton and 6 hours over but that was the laboratory school, but they called it Phoenix. So we were exposed to white teachers, German teachers, black teachers, and we had English. We had foreign language. We had all of the higher maths, and took the whole thing. And at Phoenix, like now, they can place you. You can be placed in whatever group you are, and you can even get a separate diploma. At Phoenix, we had to go through every one of the higher maths, every one of the higher English, and people left Hampton that left George B. Phoenix School could get a job anywhere. That was almost comparable to a 4-year college degree today. And they worked in the post office, they worked at NASA, they were Phoenix School graduates. So I'm saying during that time, we didn't have it as hard as many people had during desegregation because we had Phoenix School and because we had that setting with the schools. In fact, when I first went, our principal was white. Miss Ian Ross was principal then. And so we had one, this is one incident that may not even be relevant, but I have to tell you, because it was a prominent black school, and I don't know if you know about the area of Pocosin, but Pocosin, they had light-skinned people. So the Hobson came to our school, and Mr. Ian Ross was white, and we whispered all around, oh, Mr. Ross's son is going to school here. He later on thought Ryan Hop was black and he was from the coast. But that was just a little aside that we had. But we were close-knit at Hampton. We had honor societies. I happened to be fortunate enough to be on honor society. And so our honor societies were not black honor societies. High school, if we were on an Alpha Kappa Mu or whatever it was always integrated, okay? So we had a period where we knew that maybe the resources didn't come, the money didn't come, the books didn't come, but there was a spirit. And that spirit is what imbued us to go, on. We didn't come from families with money or prestige or educational background. So I want to clear that period, even though turbulent in some ways. And certainly now I can look back and even see some of the, inequities. But at the time, growing up, as you pointed, it was our happy world. We were not concerned. So, and Hampton has evolved during that period into other, to other areas where blacks are in now, of course, government, city hall, and so forth. But one other little facet of desegregation when I was at Hampton University. And so I had student teachers, and so we got the word that anybody with afros, we were going to let the student teachers teach in their schools with no afro in the white schools. They couldn't have no afros, and so the word got back to me. We're gonna have to cut off. So they said that our hair had. They say what? So my sister was a beautician, so I said, wash my hair. Cut it, condition it, and I could show, and give me an afro. So when I went taking my students into school with my new afro, I was like, here are my students. You know, they weren't going to tell me I couldn't. So we had a little joke. I said, and they had on their freshly done apple. You know, I said, hey, here are my students. And nobody ever said anything else about students having to have the hair straight in order to come to the school. But I mean, the desegregation was a period of time when we began to see the inequities, which we didn't see growing up and coming from there. But I can say overall the desegregation in Hampton among the teachers, and we had sensitivity training, because I was happened to be a teacher, and they got me to do the white teachers who were getting ready to have black children in their classes. So my first assignment was to them. I said, I'm old school, these white teachers. I said, I want you to do home visits. That's what we do in the elementary school. And so one of the white, they said, can I take my husband? I said, why? I mean, for safety. I said, you are tasked with going to these home visits, coming back with your report. So lo and behold, when they came back, this was in their first advent into a black neighborhood, because we still had black neighborhoods. So when they came back and we would put on the board their feelings and their, reporting, you know what came through? And I wrote it on the board. They hadn't seen it, but Dr. Christian, the house was as clean as a pin. I said, oh, it was? I put on the board, clean as a pin. The other said, well, they wanted the same thing for their children as we want. They said they want their children to go to college, and they want their children to be. I put up on the board aspirations, but all of those. Then I told them, I said, these are oh, no, we're not. They don't. I said, it's a stereotype. Why, of everything else you saw, the house was clean? Because your stereotype was that black people had to do that. How do you say about their aspiration that they don't want? And so forth, So I brought that down for evolution, but I brought it in to talk about another dimension of segregation when we got to know each other through more intercultural kinds of experiences.
Outstanding.